Today we are joined by Alice Hansen. You may be familiar with Alice's Tasmanian-based wellness retreats that she founded called Wild Wellness. If not, you soon will want to be. Alice is a professional travel writer and author and has crafted a unique and innovative anecdote to overwhelm, stress, those looking to drink less, or those just looking for some life balance. And in fact, it is so good that Alice was awarded the 2022 winner of Ambassador for Change Spa and Wellness Awards. Welcome, Alice, to She Sober Sydney.
Oh, thank you very much, Bella. It's lovely to be here.
I've been so looking forward to this conversation. And, as it pushes near 40 degrees here in Sydney, thoughts of ice baths and Tasmanian cool hiking trails is just so attractive. I just can't wait to hear more about your retreats. But I've heard a little about your story, your own personal struggles, and can I say kick-ass triumph over alcohol, which really inspired me years ago. And you've also had the delightful Rehab retreat experience, as I have. Um, if it's okay with you, I wouldn't mind just starting with where the whole alcohol story started for you, Alice.
Yeah, sure. It's what a lovely introduction, and now I go into the gory
I
details of it.
know. Sorry.
But no, that's great. Yes, that proves there's a hopeful future for people. But yeah. So and having listened to your own story and being so raw and honest, I think that if we are that way, I would hope that we can help others in the future. That sharing that vulnerability is yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
It all helps. It all helps for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think you were around 14. I believe I was around 15. So about the
Wow.
age of rebellious fun. And I didn't know much about alcohol at the time. But it yeah, I was probably, we're all going to a party and we'd hidden alcohol in the bushes, as you do. But I'd grown up in a pretty strict Catholic primary school and high school, and I had a wonderful circle of friends. But I carried this secret with me that I knew from primary school that I was gay, and that wasn't a good fit at the time. I think up until 97, when I was 17, it was still
Wow.
illegal gay in Tassie. It wasn't fashionable.
No.
Um, so I thought I will keep that to myself because I didn't like the look of the boys that were being, bashed up and all those things. That it's thank goodness there's big good change.
Yeah.
But when I came across alcohol, and that I still remember the first time at a friend's house, who strangely enough years later turned out that he was gay too. But I thought, look, if I've got to kiss the boys, I will do it drunk. That'll be a hell of a lot easier.
Oh,
All
God.
the thing, but it served a wonderful purpose. And the minute I drank, I thought, wow, I can finally be me, and I can be numb to all those emotions, and I can be chatty and fun. And I also remember going out into the back shed or pool room or whatever it might have been, and going to sit down on a chair and missing it completely. And at the time, it was completely hilarious, and I'm sure everyone laughed. But that was the beginning of, in those early days, fairly harmless drinking. But then, I thought being gay was such a big problem, but then alcohol became the big problem of its own.
Oh, I bet it did.
Mm.
And where did it then go to from there?
Um, well, I was quite lucky in a way. Like I went all to, we all had our 18th and the ball, going to the ball had to pretend I was in love with someone to do that. So again, alcohol was a wonderful crutch to, my little secret best friend. But it was never of any, it was not of a danger aside from, I remember borrowing my mum's heels one night and they got left out in the frost, being Tasmania. She wasn't that. But apart from the death of some high heels, there wasn't anything major. It wasn't to a point where I needed to see a doctor or anything like that. And I was lucky at the time. I'd played tennis from the age of 8. So I was playing tennis 3 hours a day. That was my life. That allowed a great kind of, and it was probably just weekend or every second weekend when there was an 18th, it was just drinking like everyone else, probably overdoing it at times, but not to any grave point.
Yeah.
And same, I took off when I just turned 18 and went on a tennis scholarship to America. And the 5 years I was over there, again, didn't really have any major, never saw the inside of a hospital or saw a doctor, just overdid it now and again, but not to any frightening degrees. It was probably when I came back to Australia and I felt a really big loss of identity. I suppose I was no longer a tennis player and the captain of the team and playing in their number one spot. I was just Alice that had, you know, and thinking I'd be able to slot in back with this friendship group, but apparently over 5 years life changes, people move, people leave, so it was starting fresh and feeling rather lost. And that's when the alcohol stepped up a notch with
Yes. And how old were you when you came back and sort of started?
22, 23. So again, those first couple of years were okay. I came back and worked as a I think my dad threw down the local newspaper and said, "Oh, darling, maybe you should get a job." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I'd only been home a little bit, but the only job in there was as a pharmaceutical rep. And I thought, I know nothing about, well, I actually can't stand doctor's surgeries. And I don't know why I applied for it. I don't like sales, but I thought, oh, there's a car and a phone. I don't have either of them. And it's a great way to travel Tassie and get back connected with the place. So I did that for a couple of years and I was fairly useless at it. And but again, during that time, the alcohol hadn't kicked in too badly. Obviously, I was driving nonstop, and probably after that, it became, a little bit more. I was again wrestling with that being gay and trying to have boyfriends and leading them along, and nothing was. I was feeling a very not an authentic existence. I spent a lot of time. Then I got a job at tourism, being their tourism Tas as their writer, destination journalist, and traveling. And I'm trying to think. I don't think there was an actual point where I just hit really heavy drinking, but there was just over a period of time, people were getting more and more worried about me, or saying, I was trying to get into the door of my house, and the keys were in my handbag, and yet I thought I had to climb over the balcony to get in. Things like, I wasn't processing things properly, and doing some fairly risky behaviours. So then it reached a point where I was encouraged to go to rehab, which I think that was 2008 or something. So I must have been 28. And
and who asked you, and on, what concerns did they have?
Probably was just maybe at that point I'd started a bit like when in America, because the drinking age was 21 and not 18. That didn't stop people drinking, it just went underground. So we drank in apartments and things. And the same kind of happened with my drinking. People were like, "Oh, you're actually quite a twit when you drink. We don't really like it." Whereas I was still married to this alcohol as though, as Annie Grace would say, the elixir of life. It was the thing that brought me happiness and made me feel a better version of me and worthy and all these things. So I thought, well, if people don't like me drinking, I'm just going to drink in secret. And so then there was the phase of, drinking a bottle of wine before I went to the dinner party, and then a glass of champagne. They were like, "Oh my God, Alice, how did you just, you went from chatting to not being able to communicate. You must not be able to hold your alcohol." That's what everybody thought. Whereas meanwhile, I had, empty bottle in my handbag. And then it got to the stage where, I would have been much better to stick to beer or something low alcohol, but it's hard to hide 12 cans of beers versus a bottle of vodka that looked like water. I thought I was a genius. I can put that in a water bottle and no one would know the difference. I was so clever. And then I'd spray myself with perfume and no one would know, apart from the fact I couldn't walk in a straight line. And
you can just knock back such high quantities very quickly, can't you? You can just it's dangerous.
It's frightening stuff. So then my drinking became very much I would drink fast and in secret, because I never knew when I could go back to this secret stash. And that became a very obviously disordered way of drinking, clearly, but it became my little way of, and then because the alcohol hit me so fast, I would go from being completely sober to inebriated and not even have that chance to go, oh, I'm starting to feel it, I should slow down, because I'd at that point so quickly that I was already too far gone to even have the sense to pull back. So
I can relate to all of what you're saying, Alice. Just you're fixated on the conversation but wanting to get back to your stash. You're drinking it really quickly because you need to then run back into the conversation. And then it just compounds that disconnection that you've got with your identity and who you are, because who you're presenting to the world is someone that's hiding something that's not authentic. It all snowballs, this alcohol thing, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there was a lot of secrecy around it. Then I felt the guilt, and you know, and I know that, you know, particularly one of my really good friends, I'd think, oh, I've got to tell her I'm gay. I've got to just let this secret out and move on. But every time I went to try and do that, I think, well, I've got to drink, you know, so much alcohol to be able to get that out of me. And what's she going to think? And people who won't like me, or they'll think I'm in love with them, or all these things rushing through my head, and not knowing whether that should even be something I should disclose. But then alcohol became something that I used for every hard emotion or negative emotion, or even a great emotion. If I had a day at Salamanca Market with my books, I'd celebrate with alcohol. If I was bored, and when I started working for myself, I didn't have to show up to a boss, so there was no reason for me not to, you know, I could drink into the night and no one's going to be waiting for me at 8:30 or whatever the case is. So there was always this permission to continue this relationship with alcohol. It was so unhealthy, and I got to the point where I just hated alcohol, and yet still remained, you know, wed to this bottle, even though it didn't bring me all the promises that it said, that, you know, that I'd be happy and I'd be more of myself and everyone would like me, and every person in my life couldn't bear the drunk Alice, and yet I didn't believe I was good enough without it. So it was this, you know, I think intellectually I knew that it was such a ridiculous pursuit and a dangerous one, and harmful and to relationships and all the beautiful people that I love so much, and yet I still turn to it as oh, well, no one will know, and I'll just have a little bit. As always, the intent was always a little bit, and I think it was my older brother that said, you know, you're drinking to these suicidal levels, like what's the matter? And I said, I've never ever, you know, wanted to harm myself. I can't even scratch myself without, you know, it wasn't about that. It was always drinking with the intention to drink just enough so no one would notice, and just enough to feel good about me and be part of this conversation. It was never to any harmful. I mean, no one wants to drink to a point where all the senses shut down. You can't remember things. You don't know who to apologise to the next day. You know, that was never. But to the outside, people are like, you're in dangerous territory, whereas I wasn't probably comprehending just how serious it had become.
No, I mean, because in a way, you're chasing that high from alcohol, but it's elusive because your tolerance is so high. But it still doesn't stop you from becoming really inebriated really quickly.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So you got to that point, did you, that it was just time to a circuit breaker, or what was the rehab experience like for you first up?
The first one, it was just kind of surreal, because I'd never been into a mental hospital. I didn't even know what they did. And I certainly wasn't anticipating this whole world of, you know, this white-walled experience with all these very sad and depressed people. I thought, oh my, if you didn't feel depressed before you walked in, like the real sadness of and I don't know if that's something that other people experience, but I really struggled with even just the company, or, you know, in group settings. And I'd sit there and think, oh my gosh, I'm so fortunate. I've got a beautiful family, and I've got friends, and I've got work, and I've got, you know, my life was all still very much together. And I'd hear these stories of, you know, sit next to people with cuts up their arms that didn't want their kids anymore, or, you know, just these such, it will make me cry on the inside. And I'd be trying to do my mindful knitting. I'd just put my head down and think, okay, just switch off and knit, because apparently that's going to make you better. Yeah, so it was all a bit confronting, because I thought, how did my life go from hitting tennis balls and, you know, doing well to this, how on earth did I end up here? It was just baffling to me.
And was the stigma did the stigma hit hard for you when you were in there? that
Yeah.
anxiety of how am I going to integrate, or how am I going to tell people what's my life going
Mm.
to be like after this? I can remember that feeling.
Absolutely. No, it was very hard, and I sure didn't share it with anyone that was beyond my little circle of, I was ashamed. I felt guilt. I felt, but most of all, I was just like, how did this happen? And it was just that alcohol just kind of snuck up and just took over my life with such power and control. And I don't know when that swap over was. And I think that, and I used to envy these people that could just drink and enjoy it and put it back down. And, whereas for me, it was just like my mind was always thinking about where's the next one. So it clearly was a giant issue, but it took probably that jolt of, yep, go, you need to be there, for me to realise how serious it had become.
And how did rehab go? Was it the solution?
Well, funnily enough, no. I think what you said in your podcast about that, they have, I guess, also the staff know that it's not 100% fix, and you've got to then go on and do your own work. And for me, I went in a lot of times, and I think I said on the Annie Grace one, I must have some ridiculous record, because I tried 26 times the rehab model, and I thought by the 27th, it's like you don't take your car to a mechanic and think that on the 27th they're going to fix it.
Yeah. Could I just backtrack there?
Yes.
This Guinness Book record of the whole rehab experience, I mean, that must have just worn you down. How did you feel going back in when you were hitting double digits?
Well, it's sometimes I have to laugh, because I'd have this nurse that, she'd just shake her head and she's like, Alice, what are you doing back here? Or why did you turn back to vodka? You idiot. Because they got so, but yeah, it was, I think once you're getting to those double digits, you think, well, wow, I'm not getting better. There must be something wrong with me. How come other people? And I suppose I started to see, being that regular revolving door person, I started to see the same faces. And I'm like, well, there's other people that aren't getting better too. And I don't know whether it was a case of me still expecting or hoping that someone exterior could fix me, because I've now realized it's actually inside me. It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility that sticks in me. And I think my family and other people too were just praying I'd come across someone in a white coat that would just have the answer, or the drug, or the whatever it might be, and we're all free from this horrible monster.
I mean, what hope. You just showed such hope, just turning up there again, going, come on. And also, I mean, I laugh because I got out of rehab and I thought, yeah, I could still moderate. And I told my husband that everybody can approach it their own way, and if you want to moderate, you can. And there I was again back into a pretty awful place. So I get it. It's the only reason why I had a chuckle.
Yes.
But don't you wish that somebody at that point, with all that money that's being sunk into these places, would have thought, okay, let's change tack here for Alice.
Yeah.
Let's look at a different approach that might, hey, I've heard of this reframing belief approach. Let's see how that might go.
I know. And it wasn't till only in recent kind of more recent times that, it's in fact, a psychologist drew a picture of a brain, and I'm like, oh, here we go. I get lost at the campus and I just switch off. But he drew two circles, and one was the cognitive brain and one was the emotional brain. And he said you could work on that cognitive brain for the next 20 years and do your CBT till you're forever. And you're not gonna intellectually get well through that process. It's the emotional brain.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh wow, yes, of course, because I'm driven. For me, drinking wasn't a physical thing. Funnily enough, I used to sell Campril when I was a pharmaceutical rep, and doctors tried that and do this for your physical cravings. I'm like, it's not physical. It's when I get upset about something, or I walk in front of people at a book launch. It's emotionally driven, and it's only been then that I can go, okay, it's that mind body connection, and it's somatic work, and no matter how many things I read, or things that are all to do with psychological, and same thing, like if the psychiatrist at one point, I remember him saying, just drink beer. I think he was just trying to save my life, so I didn't turn to vodka and end up no longer with us.
Yeah.
But me, I walked out of his office and thought, oh, great, I can drink again. I can
Yeah.
moderate, like I said. And it was like this permission to go out. So I tried that. I've tried only beer. I've tried only on weekends. I've tried, and then the more when you fail on that, then you feel, you've lost the battle again, and then you just throw your air and drink to make yourself feel better because you've failed. It's just this, yes.
It is indeed. Yeah. What were your friends and family feeling at that point?
Look, I've put them through the ringer, and my beautiful family is still there and so beautiful and supportive. But it's been such an incredible stress because when I would drink, I would then have no capacity to, they'd have to go out looking for me, or they'd be dealing with me. Oh, she's back in hospital. Or, at one stage I got so sick of the rehab model that I thought, one night I was like, well, that's it. I'm going to escape. I'm going to go, and I jumped the fence, and and then I was like, oh my gosh, I've done it. I ripped my favorite jeans, which I wasn't happy about. When I got on the other side of the fence, and all rehabs are they're not even. You can walk out the front doors anytime you want. It's not like
they're voluntary.
Yeah, they're voluntary. But I thought, no, that's it. I've had enough of this. And I must have still been maybe a little bit drunk from when I was admitted. I'm not sure, because it's not the smartest idea. And when I got on the other side with a bunch of horses, I was like, now what am I going to do? But then I rang a taxi, got picked up, and straight to the bottle shop. So I certainly, and I've done that with AA sometimes, where I felt so kind of, it wasn't, AA wasn't something that worked for me, and I'd sit there, I think quite an older crowd to my first AA meeting, I remember particularly, and sitting at down the back of a church in this dark, dingy room with a little radiator and 80-year-old men telling me about their drinking days. And by the end of the 2 hours, I just wanted to go and drink. So me, and I've got people, a lovely friend in Sydney that swears by it. She found her husband in those circles. So I'm not anti-rehab or AA, or it's got to sort of find what works for you. And for me, This Naked Mind and Hello Sunday Morning and more of the positive vibes were what that drew me forward to the life I wanted, versus a fear-based approach that, if you take a sip, Alice, you're going to get hit by a train.
You're surrendered, you have no control.
Yes.
That approach, it's frightening, makes you feel very small and
powerless.
But that's right. And again, I fully support all approaches for everybody, no matter what works. But Alice, it's such a lovely story, because then you did find an approach, and you did start reading, didn't you, and absorbing in all that This Naked Mind and Hello Sunday Morning had to offer. When did you get back into your groove and you felt empowered again?
Yeah, well, it was, again, and I'm not sure how I came across Hello Sunday Morning, but I thought, I'm just going to reach out to this Chris Rain and thank him, because I was like, finally a platform that is people doing yoga and people getting out on the beach and having breakfast with their friends on Sunday instead of being curled up hungover. Yeah. And I was like, that's what I want. And I didn't expect to hear from him. And then suddenly I get this lovely email back, and then there was a bit of back and forth, and he was coming to talk in Tassie at a Vodafone conference or something, and he said, do you want to talk with me? And just became friends. And then he wanted to come to CrossFit, and so off we went in the pouring rain at 6 a.m. one morning. And I had to do squats with a broomstick, because that was my level of strength. Well, tough guys were carrying their giant weights, but no, I just loved his approach. And so, and then on that Hello Sunday Morning website, I found This Naked Mind in the book, the resources, and that led me to Annie Grace's book. And then when I just I think it was Audible, I must have been listening to her voice, and the more she talked, I was like, oh my gosh, I can relate. This is me. This is I couldn't believe. And that whole idea of shifting your beliefs around alcohol I was like, it was such a light bulb of, how did I not, here I was getting told by doctors, and doctors have been there and done wonderful things as well, but maybe put the alcohol a bit further away from you, or have a glass of water between your glass of wine, or all these tactics that were useless in many ways, or that just kept me in the loop, or giving me, for me, it was like, right, I can still drink as long as I, have water in between. It's not going to stop you getting very drunk by the time you've had your ninth glass of wine. But
I know it just the compassion-led grace approach, as you said, and sort of mindfully becoming aware of why you do what you're doing it's enlightening, and also just the understanding what alcohol actually does to your body. Like, I would have loved to have known that, gosh, when I was 10, let alone 40, trying to work out, what I was chasing in that empty red wine bottle. So that just, you had a light bulb moment, and how did it stop? Like, you did the mindset change first and physiological stuff as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it was around the time I, Annie Grace's book first time round, and I was like, woohoo. And I think I went 9 months without drinking, because I'm like, oh, I've unlocked my freedom. And so I think that was the longest stretch in years and years that I hadn't drunk. And I think people thought, oh, this is great. Whoever this American woman is, whatever works, great. And there were certain things like, run the tape forward, where she said, like, it might feel nice to have this first drink, but what's it going to be like? Well, for me, I was like, what's it going to be like being in the emergency room? That's not quite so fun. Yeah. So whereas I would often drink, I'd never even consider what's going to happen later. I'd be excited by the spontaneity and the fun of the evening, and where will it lead? Certainly not considering the repercussions. I was like some teenage boy with his new license. I didn't think what could be. And then the ACT technique, where, I love that, where you acknowledge what is it? You might remember.
Awareness, clarity, turnaround.
Yeah, exactly. And just being aware of, okay, I'm thinking I need to drink because it'll give me more confidence to give this speech. And then, the clarity that I then reflect, well, what was it like last time you talked in front of the Premier and you couldn't even get your speech out because you dropped it in the portaloo before the speech?
No.
I've got some one ripper stories. And then the turnaround, let's see what it's like, just to get curious and see what it's like to watch other people get drunk and how annoying they are.
Yeah.
So it took a while, because I was still, obviously my neural pathways were so well ingrained that I did well for those 9 months. And then I went to Dark Mofo, and that was my favourite festival of the year.
Yeah, in Tassie.
Yeah, and I was due to write a story and go out to some freakish office building that had been turned into a nightclub. And I just had this moment of, there's no way I can go out in those red lights and around those crowds without the excitement, without alcohol. And it all just flooded back, and I was like, oh, I'll just drink a little bit. But then it was just, as you might know, it just then became this all of back where I started. So then, there was a lot where I did, the alcohol experiment, and I've done the path. And so I had to revisit it more than once. And, I really thought, I love the idea of spontaneous sobriety. And I think, and I love the idea that it, it might take you 10 years to reach that point of being ready to stop. But it shouldn't take 10 years of therapy to, once you're ready. But I just realized I needed to put a lot more things in place to make to make it watertight.
Yeah, and you touched on some somatic work as well. So lots of work calming your nervous system down, and as well, that supported you.
Yeah, and reconnecting with myself, because I think everyone else said, we love you just as you are. You don't have to keep trying to be successful and doing all these things to get, to make yourself feel better. We just love you as you are, and you certainly don't need alcohol to prop yourself up. But because I didn't believe that myself, it wouldn't have mattered how many times other people said it. So I was still battling with that that belief in my own ability without going to that, because that well ingrained pathway to go straight to feel better and to feel part of a tribe, as you said. I just want to be included and have a voice that I normally wouldn't speak up, in meetings or in groups or group settings or whatever. I'd be the quiet one. I love to listen to other people, but I thought without alcohol, I'm not going to be able to chat.
Yep, that was me too.
Mm, mm.
And also, I guess, because your drinking had started really when you were forming ideas about your identity, and that was clashing with everybody else's ideas of what identity needs to be. And so it was so ingrained there with self-expression, identity, being accepted. I mean, do you sometimes look back and just think, I just wonder if everybody else had accepted me, if I felt really courageous to, step into my identity at a young age, whether all of this would have unraveled in the way that it did? Do you ever kind of go back there?
Yeah, well, sometimes I reflect on it. I just watched an iView program last night on a young transgender boy, just going through that process, and it's so open and discussed, and people are, I hear mothers saying you can love whoever you want, it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. I'm like, oh my gosh, if I was told that would be a dream.
Yeah.
I had to be quietly in love with my PE teacher, and that's just weird. So
not weird.
Yeah, but it's such a joy to see, people walking hand in hand at Salamanca, where the same place with Rodney Croom was arrested for the very, a few meters down, which become a very dear friend as well, and he's the one that's fought so hard for marriage equality and all the rest. And I just think it's beautiful that now kids can be what they want, and it's still a minefield in a lot of ways, but it gives them. I had no role models. I had no, all I had, I think, was Martina Navratilova, and someone say, don't want to like her because she's one of those people. Like Steffi Graf as my favourite player. But it was just very much, I couldn't talk to the school counsellor because it was a Catholic school, and I thought, no way, I don't want to lose my friendship circle. And I guess I reflect on that, and some people, a lot of my gay friends, I hate the Catholic Church, and I think I'm not choosing to feel that hate and what it's done to me, and oh my gosh, it's nearly killed me through alcohol. I'm like, no, I actually got some beautiful values out of living, and learning that way. And the school principal who's just retired is a lovely friend of mine. I don't feel towards that whole. I'm so glad that times have changed, and this is, I guess this is part of my story, and I've only got I can't look back with regret or anger. It's just such wasted emotion. I think I'm off to think, well, all of those really crappy years I can turn into something good. Like, there's got to be a reason that I've gone through hell. I might as well. And I was very early on, I didn't want anyone to know that I struggled with alcohol. There was such shame around it. And it wasn't until more recently that I even said about it. I rang up the rehab because I thought, oh, maybe I've been 10 times. And when they said, one of them said 14 times, another one said 10. I was like, oh, adding them up in my head. And I was like, oh yeah, I went to one in Sydney once, and I add that to the list. And then I was like, 26, that's just wrong.
You could write a booklet, a travel booklet of the do a rating.
How to escape. It's late at night. I've got it all.
Look. Well, all of that did lead to something quite magnificent, which is this creation of this beautiful wild wellness method, the creation of the wild
wellness. Yes, you got it right.
I should say it properly. So the creation of the wild wellness. Tell us how you came up with the idea and created it, and what's it look like?
Yeah, well, when I got a bit over the rehab model, I decided, I was like, oh well, I've got to do something, and I returned home to my childhood home with my mum and dad in my childhood room, and I was like, oh, this is just so wrong, but it was so necessary, and they're very outdoors people, and we got out bushwalking, we got into the fresh air. I discovered, strangely, when I was very hungover, I came across a Gwyneth Paltrow documentary. I thought, oh, that'll do, I know her name. It just happened that Wim Hof was on it, doing this cold water exposure, and I was like, oh, that sounds horrible. I don't do cold water, but even in my hungover state, I tried his breathing techniques, and I held my breath and I lasted 30 seconds. Then I did the whole breathing technique, and then I held it for 90, and I was like, that's really weird. I couldn't explain it. And I was like, I've got to explore this more. And then so as I did, I realized that the breath work and the cold water were for me. I'd spent years in rehab with people going, well, what can your replacement be for alcohol? And, the mindful knitting wasn't cutting it. But the cold water did, because it gave me that shock and that state change that I sought from alcohol and never got. There was the excitement about it. There was the thrill, and there was the physical change of all the good stuff that it did. And it then became part of my therapeutic. My brothers had surfed all my childhood, and I always thought, what are you idiots doing in the winter in these waves? I'd always be on the beach taking their photos, because that was my job apparently. But never had any appreciation of what the power of what cold water could do. So then I took a 10-week course with him that culminated in an ice bath at the end of it, and just kind of, things evolved. It was all these different, the breath work was something that I'd been, again, told to meditate and look inward and spend time with myself by psychologists, and I'd last 3 minutes and think, oh, I need to be doing something. I'd always like to be active, even though that was exactly what I needed to do, sit with my feelings. And breathwork allowed me to do that, because then it became, I could hold my breath for a couple of minutes. I'm like, wow, this is like some kind of magic. And it helped with...
I was just going to say, is part of it teaching you that you're stronger than you think, that you can cope with discomfort?
That's right. And I think it was, for me, it was a discipline thing. And when I did return home, and it was just a passing comment of my father when he was in the Navy, he said, we had compulsory PT. And I thought, wow, I've never had discipline with my approach to my recovery journey. I did with tennis. I had a program of 4 or 6 weeks leading up to every tournament that I religiously did my knee bends and my volleys against the wall, and that's why I could be successful on that front. But I never applied the same discipline. And so I wrote up on a whiteboard, and I had, cold water every day, even if it's a cold shower. I had made myself no excuses, and I kept it really simple because I knew I wanted to make sure it was achievable. I did my breathing every morning, and then once you have jumped in the ocean, you're like, I can do anything. This water's freezing, and if I can do that, and I'm certainly awake and alive now, and that became my replacement in a way, because it's easier to replace alcohol with something than just to stop a habit.
Yeah.
And then Annie Grace, consume anything of hers daily. And at the time I had the 100 Days of Lasting Change emails. So I just went back to 0 and did all of them.
Yeah.
So it just kick-started for me. And then meditation and then inviting exercise back into my life, and all the things that make you feel good. And rather than spiraling downward, it was spiraling upward, and eating well and all those things. I didn't have time for alcohol. I didn't want to disrupt my healthy feeling, my good sleep. It just didn't fit, and then it became easy. I was so distracted by the good life, and then all good things started to come in, and I was doing lots more travel with writing, and that's what always happened when I'd stop drinking. All the good would start to flow back in.
So beautifully put. And then how did you slowly start to form the retreat idea?
Yeah, well, that was, again, I'd built a little pod house just out of Hobart, about 40 minutes, and my idea was to ultimately, I was going to build lots of them and have this escape and get away. Anyway, I was lying on a blow-up mattress in my little pod, because I was staying with Mum and Dad. I gave them the bed because there's only one bed. And I sat bolt upright at 2 a.m. and I was like, I've figured it out. It's going to be wild wellness. Like, Tasmania should be the epicenter for wellness. We've got the best wilderness in the world. And Mum and Dad were like, what is going on? Because Mum sleeps like a log, and Dad was like, talk to us in the morning. What are you? So usually my random ideas come at random times, and then it was on. From there, I was like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. If I can create this wild wellness method, and I need to gift people what I've learned, and it may not be the traditional route. Cold water isn't as mainstream, and the breath work isn't as mainstream as perhaps going to your GP and getting a script, and don't get me wrong, they've helped me too, and with great scripts, but a combination of getting good help with a psychologist along with these other things and getting out into the wilderness, because I could see what it did for me. It gave me freedom, along with Annie Grace's, that whole shifting my beliefs. And so I guess I just wanted to share that, because it had been such a, so powerful for me. And so it really just started out with, I rang the Tas Walking Company, because I'd done a lot of writing for them, and I said, can I hire your Bay of Fires lodge in the off season? And when I explained what I was doing, they said, no, we want to walk with you. We want to, don't just hire our lodge. We want to incorporate wild wellness into. So next, had a wild wellness 3 Capes walk, and it was unforgettable. It was just, people arrived, and the first thing they did was walk into the water together. And my brother and sister came on that trip, and I could see in the photos early on my brother standing there with he had his shoulder crossed and looking very kind of distressed in the background, thinking what on earth into for the next 4 days, because we were doing some kind of warm up where we get warm and people were waving their arms around on the beach, and not really his thing. By the end of it, we were doing 40 minutes of breath work. He said, I've never laid down and just breathed for 40 minutes. He's got 2 young kids, but people were moved to tears, people were journaling, people were saying this is life-changing stuff. And that was the combination of the wilderness working on, as it does without even saying a word. It's just, it brings you back to what's important. And it was an alcohol-free trip. People, I've had retreats where journalists have said, this has changed my whole, again, what you mentioned about the health front of alcohol. She said, I had no idea that there's a 15% higher chance of breast cancer, or all those things that Dr. Chris shared with us when he came. And that was another thing, through Chris Rain. He said, Chris Davis will be able to help you. Just give him a ring. And I'm talking to this doctor who I've never talked to in my life. And he said, of course I'll come to one of your retreats. It was just connection with people. Normally you'd think, well, don't you want to know who I am and what this is about, rather than just committing your name. And yet he flew down and he was up doing the PT every morning. He got in an ice bath. I thought it was just people that, and then he left saying, this is life-changing for me. And I'm like,
wow,
you're not the one that's supposed to say it's life-changing. You're the one that had these people moved so, that they can't go back to seeing alcohol ever the same way. So, there were about 20 people that came in for that experience. And it was just, very, very special to think that people can be affected in that way. We had a trauma-informed yoga instructor. We had an NLP master practitioner. We had a reflexologist. We had Anya, a yoga instructor who doubles as a mindset coach, as well as a clinical psychologist and a singer. And, so people that spoke each night were just pretty powerful. And these are people that I've just happened across along the journey that just were the perfect fit.
For my own personal research, what's the menu like?
Amazing. The other thing, for that one, we had Sophia, interstate beautiful chef, and she works with only the most, the freshest ingredients, and just puts all this love into her food. Like, she literally does these little chants and things, but it's just a beautiful human. So everything just came together like magic.
So you're really drawing people from all around Australia that hear about it, and they come on down for, what's the time frames there?
Yeah, well, there's 3-day retreats. We've got one on Bruni coming up. We've got a cruise coming up on the East Coast aboard a new vessel. We've got Fire and Ice, which is a day experience where we go up Kunanyi, Wellington, where we go to this little secret waterhole, and that's where we took Lane Beachley for World Traveller, and it was just to put a surfer in this freezing water. And I don't think it went to air, the words she said when she first got in, but yes, it's cold. It was 5 degrees, I think, that day with the water. But talk about making you feel alive, and that whole tribe feeling. None of them would have got in that water alone. But then next there's 8 people just all squealing with delight and going, oh my gosh, I've done this. So it's just proof that even that camaraderie is is a magical thing and connection. And I love that Johann Hari, is it? The opposite of addiction.
Yeah.
I'll forever believe that. I mean, the friends that, God bless them, have stood by my side, and all the people that I've connected through with Wild Wellness. It's raining. I don't know if you can hear right now. That's it's
that's Tassie.
Yes. And I love it. I love all these seasons. Yeah. It's almost like these people just came in at the right time, and it's such a blessing. It's something I couldn't even invent, the way that these people have been drawn into it, or have just landed on my lap for whatever reason.
Alice, how does it feel for you to have incorporated helping others also seek balance and recover from alcohol? So, when you are there with other people sort of in the early stages and they're expressing their desire to get free of alcohol, how does it feel for you in that moment to be there to support them?
Yeah, well, it's an incredibly good feeling. I think a few years ago when I put out on Facebook and I was like, oh, what am I doing about my own alcohol struggles? I couldn't believe the people that came forward that I never expected. People that I thought had these beautiful, shiny lives that we all put on social media, came forward and said, oh, I've been drinking beer ever since I was at college with you in America every day. And I was like, oh, don't you have a kid and a beautiful wife? And or someone only a few days ago in Costa Rica who he's like, I've just got to stop drinking. I need to stop. And I was like, here's Annie Grace. She'll help you start with the experiment, do whatever you, but it feels, it's such a joy to help other people, because I think, this has all been worthwhile as far as I don't think you can understand unless you've been through the the trenches. And I was just, my mouth dropped open and I'm like, you've gone from lawyer to doing this, and I bet you probably feel the same. Like, how was it back at you?
I could not believe sort of the full circle moment that I'm having now, because I've got a lot of lawyers that come to me for counselling as part of the work, and that have just been encouraged to open up about their experience and try and get some help to seek less, because somebody who was a lawyer that, particularly in that career, reputation means everything. You don't want to, we're all carrying around imposter syndrome in that area of work, but you don't dare put your hand up and ever admit that sort of vulnerability. So sharing my story and then helping others has meant so much. It does attach a bit of meaning and purpose to all that I'd went through as well. So they weren't necessarily wasted years. Also, I was one of those lawyers that stood around in the law firm sort of talking to all the other lawyers going, God, where would you rather be? What would you rather be doing? always been a seeker. But it feels good. It does feel good. Yeah.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yep.
Alice, I could talk to you for many more hours, but I need to let you go. I need to jump on, do my own research for my next retreat. But where can people find you?
Yeah, well, it's wildwellnessmethod.com. And all the things are there. So it's we'll have pretty much 3 or 4 fire and ice experiences this year, and more that come up depending on, we've got a group that's just booked in a couple of weeks. So we can always add more dates there, but it's all right there.
Fabulous.
And on social media of course as well. So but it's so wonderful. I'm so glad you reached out, because I just feel it's an honor, and I think the more we talk about it and bring it out of the darkness, because there's so many people that are quietly struggling, especially the mums and the wine time and all the things that it doesn't take much to scratch the surface and see that struggles. And even during COVID, I'm like, why is everything shut but the bottle shops? Like,
I know
that are wrong. That I think the more we talk, the more it gives other people permission to go, actually I'm having a struggle too. It's yeah, so I think what you're doing is an incredible thing.
Oh,
I'm into paper, I'm not much of a talker, but I think, look, if we can help people through our own struggles, then gosh, it's worthwhile.
I agree. Look, it's been an absolute honor having you on, Alice. I would really, from the first moment I heard your story on Annie Grace's This Naked Mind podcast, I just loved everything you had to say. It was so genuine and relatable, and gave such hope. So, I feel, like it's been just such a lovely conversation. And also, you've helped me now fully understand why going for a jog and then diving into the cold ocean is something that I absolutely covet. I now get it. I now understand why I enjoy it so much. It's that crazy. I mean, the water's not as cold as Tassie, but it's sort of the wuss bag approach to
Oh,
the cold water experience.
no, I was a wuss until I discovered Wim Hof. In fact, I think one year, the only time I got in the water was when I think I ruined another Christmas. And my brother picked me up the next morning, Simon, carried me over the road from the beach house and dumped me in the water with my clothes on. Got his way with letting me know that he's not happy.
Little did he know, planted a
Oh,
seed.
exactly. And then I had to walk back in soaking wet like a wet rat and say sorry to the family again.
Sorry. Oh, that day I ruined another Christmas. That's the title. No.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alice. Enjoy the day.
All right, you too. Thanks again.
See ya.
Bye.